Growing up, I always felt like I was invisible at home. My parents seemed to care only about my sister. It was always, your sister needs this, or your sister wants that. She was the center of their world, and I was just there in the background. But one day, when my parents decided to skip one of the biggest moments of my life, something changed inside me. That was the day I decided that enough was enough. Sometimes, I wonder why they even adopted me. Did they really want another child, or was I just an extra responsibility to them? There are times when I question if they regret adopting me or if they see me as a burden. It often feels like I was brought into the family just to be ignored. My sister never wanted me around, and my parents always seemed more interested in keeping her happy than in making me feel loved. My life wasn't always this way. When I was just 4 years old, my entire world turned upside down. My biological parents and I were in a terrible car accident. Sadly, my parents didn't survive. I was the only one who made it out alive, but I didn't walk away unhurt. I ended up in the hospital where I stayed for almost a year. The nurses later told me that I had been in a coma for 4 months. For the other 9 months, I struggled with severe seizures because of the trauma from the accident. Those days in the hospital were some of the hardest times of my life. I felt scared, lonely, and lost. Sometimes, I even blamed myself for what happened to my parents. The doctors did their best to help me, even bringing in a psychologist to support me mentally and emotionally. Eventually, I recovered enough to leave the hospital, but I had nowhere to go. I didn't have any other family to turn to. After I was discharged, I was taken to an orphanage far from the city. The doctors thought it would be better for me to be somewhere peaceful, away from the sounds and sights of cars. They believed the quiet environment would help me heal faster, both in body and mind. 3 years later, my life changed again. I was adopted by a new family who already had a daughter named Mary. My adoptive parents knew all about my past, about the accident, the nightmares that woke me up screaming, and the breakdowns that would come from time to time. Even though they were warned, they still wanted to take me in and promised to give me a loving home. When we finally went home together, I hoped for a fresh start, a place where I could feel safe and loved. But as time went on, it became clear that this new family wasn't exactly what I had imagined. Instead of feeling welcome, I felt like an outsider, a stranger in my own home. And every day, I wondered if things would ever really change. When I was adopted, I wasn't ready for a new family. I was still grieving the loss of my parents, and adjusting to a new life was hard. But my adoptive parents showed me kindness and affection, helping me feel a bit less alone in the world. During the first 3 years with my new family, I felt safe and loved. I began to feel like I finally had a place to call home, which brought me some comfort. At first, everything seemed okay. But over time, my adoptive sister, Mary, started acting differently toward me. She began to distance herself, often complaining about little things I did around the house. I thought she was just being a typical older sister, teasing me or getting annoyed over small stuff like siblings do. But deep down, things were different. Mary didn't act like she cared about me. Instead, she seemed resentful. Mary felt like I was taking away everything she cared about. She was jealous because I got a lot of attention from our parents. What she didn't understand was that I needed that attention. I wasn't okay, mentally or emotionally. After the accident and losing my parents, I needed extra care and support to heal. But Mary couldn't understand that. She hadn't been through the same kind of pain I had, and besides, she was still young herself. By the time I started middle school, things got worse. My parents didn't pay as much attention to me as they had before. I thought maybe it was because I was growing up, and they wanted me to learn how to be more independent. I figured they were trying to help me become stronger, so I wouldn't need to rely on them as much. But at the same time, Mary had started telling them how she felt neglected, and she struggled with school, blaming it on the attention they gave to me instead of her. While I wasn't allowed to join the soccer team because my parents worried I'd get hurt, I was allowed to play racket sports, which they thought was safer. But even with this small freedom, Mary's resentment only grew. When I entered high school, things got even more complicated. I developed a crush on one of Mary's best friends, and eventually, we started dating. I had no idea that this would create an even bigger gap between Mary and me. Mary felt like I was taking away everyone who mattered to her. It wasn't just about her friend, she felt like I was taking her parents and now even her closest friend. After my girlfriend and I started dating, Mary stopped making new friends and became even more distant from me. After a few months, though, I decided to end things with my girlfriend. My PTSD was starting to flare up again, and I was becoming more tense and irritable. I was afraid that if I continued down this path, I might hurt someone, even if I didn't mean to. The emotional struggles were catching up with me, and I didn't want anyone else to be caught in the mess that was my life. I began going to AB meetings, and my parents arranged for me to see a therapist. But each time I had a therapy appointment, my parents couldn't come with me. My sister, Mary, always found some excuse that kept them from going, making me feel like my needs were always pushed aside. Still, I kept attending, and little by little, I started feeling better. 4 months before I was set to graduate high school, I was really making progress. Graduation was something I had looked forward to for a long time, hoping it would be a day my parents would finally celebrate with me. On the big day, I dressed up in a fancy suit my parents had bought for the occasion. I was excited, sitting in the living room and waiting for them to take me to the school. As I waited, I suddenly heard a loud noise from the stairs. I turned around to see Mary at the bottom of the staircase, lying on the floor with a cut on her forehead that was bleeding. My heart raced as I yelled for Mom and Dad to come downstairs quickly. They rushed down, calling Mary's name, full of worry. "Mary, what happened?" Mom asked, her voice filled with panic. "Jacob pushed me," Mary whispered, just loud enough for them to hear. I couldn't believe it. She was accusing me of pushing her down the stairs. Why would I do something like that, especially on my graduation day? My parents didn't question her. They were so focused on Mary that they immediately decided to take her to the hospital. Before they left, they handed me some money for a cab and told me to get to school on my own. I couldn't understand why they would believe Mary without even asking me what happened. As I sat in the cab alone, 1,000 thoughts filled my mind. I felt angry, hurt, and lost. I even thought about running away from home, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I realized I just had to get through the day on my own, no matter how much it hurt. When I arrived at my graduation, I looked around at all the families there, clapping and cheering. I wished my parents could have been there too, like other families were, proud and excited. I missed my biological parents deeply that day. They would have been there with me, celebrating this big moment. After the ceremony, a friend invited me to a graduation party, but I decided not to go. I thought my parents might want to talk about what happened with Mary earlier, so I headed home. When I walked in, my mom and dad were sitting in the living room, waiting for me. I sat down on the couch across from them, ready for whatever they were about to say. "Son," Dad began, "we know you've been through a lot, and we understand if you're still struggling. But what you did to your sister today was wrong. It wasn't the right thing to do, especially today. She could have been seriously hurt." I couldn't believe it. They truly thought I had pushed Mary. It felt like no matter how hard I tried, they would never see me for who I really was. I was getting blamed for something I didn't even do. It felt so unfair. Life had already been hard, taking my real parents away from me, and now I was being accused of something I hadn't done. After that day, things changed between me and Mary. I decided to keep my distance from her as much as I could. It was clear she was trying to turn my parents against me, making them regret ever adopting me. As summer approached, I applied to college, hoping to build a future for myself. When I told my parents, they seemed proud at first. But a few days later, they told me they couldn't afford to pay my tuition fees. I felt like my parents were changing. They were once caring, but now they seemed distant and harsh, almost like strangers. I knew Mary had a lot to do with it. I didn't let that stop me. I wrote sponsorship letters to different places, hoping someone would help me with college fees. Luckily, a local bank offered me financial support. That's how I was able to start college. During my time there, I met my future wife and her brother, Scott. Scott and I became close friends, especially after I started dating his sister. He was incredibly skilled with computers and was always there to lend a hand if I needed it. During college, I barely heard from my parents. It seemed they were happier without me around. Maybe they were glad that I was out of their lives, even if just for a little while. I focused on my studies and tried to let go of the hurt. As graduation from college came closer, I thought it would be nice to have my family there to celebrate with me. I invited them, hoping this time might be different. But on the morning of my graduation, my mom called me. She told me they wouldn't be coming because Mary had been robbed. She said Mary was too scared to travel or be left alone, so they needed to stay with her. My mom even said that Mary needed them more than I did. Those words hit me hard. It felt like every important moment in my life had been overshadowed by Mary. Whenever I needed my parents, it was always Mary this or Mary that. I understood that Mary was their biological daughter, but I was their child too. They had signed those adoption papers and promised to be my parents. But it felt like they only saw Mary and I was just there. I didn't even expect both of them to come. One of them could have stayed with Mary while the other came to support me. But they didn't. Once again, Mary needed them more than I did, and that was that. That day, I realized I would never be as important to them as Mary was. I was just the adopted one in their eyes. My happiness, my achievements, they didn't matter as much. It felt like I was a meaningless orphan, while Mary was their precious baby. That was the moment I understood that no matter what I did, I would always come second in their hearts. I decided to let go of the past and move forward with my life. 10 years after graduation, I asked my girlfriend to marry me, and she said yes. I was overjoyed and couldn't wait to share the news with my family. I went home for dinner to announce my engagement, hoping everyone would be happy for me. When I told them, my parents looked thrilled, but Mary didn't seem happy at all. She just sat there, looking like she wanted to disappear. I couldn't understand why she seemed jealous, even though she already had mom and dad all to herself. I wondered if she simply couldn't stand to see me happy. After glaring at me for a moment, she got up, gave me a sour look, and walked to her room. Mom, Dad, and I looked at each other, wondering if anyone had said something wrong, but we couldn't think of anything. Soon, we started preparing for the wedding. Mary refused to help, saying she was too busy with work and couldn't leave the company just for a wedding. She told Mom and Dad to go ahead with the plans and assured them she'd take care of everything at work while they were gone. I really wanted my parents to be there for this special day, but I was scared Mary would try to pull her usual tricks, keeping them away from me. So, I went to talk to her. I asked her to let Mom and Dad be a part of my wedding because it was one of the most important days of my life. She just smirked at me, giving me a cold, almost mocking smile. I also spoke to my parents, asking them to make sure they could come. They told me not to worry and insisted that Mary wouldn't do anything to hurt me. I wasn't so sure, but I tried to trust them. Finally, the wedding day arrived. I was excited and a bit nervous, looking around the house for my dad to help me get ready. But he was nowhere to be found. My heart sank, and I instantly suspected Mary was up to something. Then, I received a voicemail from Dad. He said he and Mom couldn't come to the wedding because Mary had been in a car accident. I felt a rush of worry, thinking she might be seriously hurt. But deep down, I had a feeling this was just another of her plans to keep my parents away from me on my special day. As I stood there on my wedding day without my parents, I felt a deep sadness. I missed my real parents so much, especially at that moment. I wished they were there to see what was happening, to see how I was being treated by the people who were supposed to be my family. I got married without my family there. My wife and her brother, Scott, kept asking where my parents were, but I felt embarrassed to tell my in-laws that my own family didn't show up to my wedding. Deep down, I was hurt and disappointed that my parents chose Mary over me again. But I didn't want to let it ruin my day. This was my wedding, and I deserved to feel happy. After the wedding, my wife and I went on our honeymoon. For the first time since I lost my biological parents, I felt truly happy. Being with my wife made me feel whole, like she was the missing part of my life. She didn't mind my struggles, like the nightmares that still haunted me. When I'd wake up in the middle of the night, she'd hold me tight and whisper, "It's okay, it's just a dream. I'm here with you." I had never felt safer. I used to think I needed a therapist, but what I really needed was her by my side. During our honeymoon, Scott called me with an offer. He asked if I wanted him to edit my wedding photos and videos, free of charge. How could I say no to that? I gave him the green light to go ahead, and he started working on them. We spent about 4 wonderful weeks on our honeymoon, and I didn't even think about my family back home. I was completely focused on enjoying this special time with my wife. After our honeymoon, we returned home and got back to work. We rented a small apartment to save up for a house. Soon after, my brother-in-law, Scott, came over to show us the photos he'd edited. I thought he'd just clean them up a bit, but I was surprised to see that he'd added my parents into the wedding photos, making it look like they were there. At first, I was unsure how to feel about it. Using Photoshop to add my parents into the pictures felt strange, but then Scott shared an idea. He said if I posted those photos online, it would drive Mary crazy to see that my parents weren't there at my wedding while she wasn't. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. It was a small payback for all the ways she tried to ruin my happiness. So, I decided to go along with the plan and posted the photos on social media. Almost immediately, the pictures started getting tons of likes and comments. But the reactions I was really waiting for were from Mary, my mom, or my dad. I wanted them to see the photos and feel even a hint of regret for missing such an important day in my life. Seeing all the positive comments lifted my spirits. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was in the shadow of my family's neglect. These were my memories, and I had made them beautiful, even if my family wasn't really there. The day after I posted my wedding pictures, I received a lot of calls and messages from home. My family must have finally seen the photos. When I picked up the phone, I could tell right away that my parents were furious. They sounded like they were about to explode with anger. My parents told me never to come back to their house, saying that what I had done was unethical and shameless. All I did was post pictures of my wedding, with the edited images of them included. Was it really so wrong? Mom kept telling me that Mary hadn't stopped crying over it, saying she felt left out and neglected. She demanded that I take down the photos and videos immediately. But I refused. Dad then told me, "Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. Just take down that nonsense you posted. Don't make me regret ever giving you a home." His words stung, filled with anger and disappointment. I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer. I laughed and replied, "Listen, Dad, don't think you did me a favor by giving me a home. You gave me a roof over my head, sure, but I had that at the orphanage too. Thanks for the education, but apart from that, you and Mom only made me miss my real parents more every day. You've always been bad parents who only cared about Mary, never about me." The line went silent for a moment. I took a deep breath and continued, "By the way, maybe you should read Mary's diary. You might learn the real reason she suffered on all my special days. You'll see it was all part of her plan. You always took her side without even thinking about how it made me feel. I felt worthless, like I meant nothing to you." I then added, "If you want to make it up to me, maybe you can arrange a second wedding that you'll actually attend. We can take pictures together like a real family, and then I'll take down the other photos and videos." My parents were shocked. They could hardly believe I was asking them to arrange another wedding, just so they could be there this time. But I wanted them to realize how much it hurt that they missed my wedding in the first place. Eventually, my parents asked to see Mary's diary, and when they read it, they were stunned. They discovered that all of Mary's misfortunes on my special days had been carefully planned by her. She had gone out of her way to make sure my moments were ruined, just so she could keep our parents' attention all to herself. This truth shook my parents. For the first time, they understood that Mary had manipulated them, turning them against me over and over again. It was painful for them to realize, but finally, they saw the real reason I had felt so alone all these years. Mary always seemed so innocent, but clearly, she wasn't as innocent as everyone thought. She was jealous of me, believing I had taken everything she thought should be hers. She let that jealousy grow inside her, until it completely took over. Her actions became so controlled by envy that she didn't care about anyone's feelings but her own. If it weren't for my brother-in-law, I'd probably still be feeling sorry for myself, thinking about all the ways my family had hurt me over the years. But now, looking back, I realize Mary's actions were more than just selfish. They were truly damaging. All she wanted was to keep our parents' attention, even if it meant ruining my life along the way. Mary's jealousy led her to take extreme actions, including keeping my parents from my wedding. That moment when they missed my wedding was the final straw for me. It was clear that my family would never be what I needed them to be. Missing such an important day showed me just how much they'd allowed Mary's manipulations to control their actions. Thanks to the support of my brother-in-law, I was able to see things more clearly. I no longer blame myself for how my family treated me, and I can see that Mary's jealousy was at the root of it all. She played the part of the perfect daughter, but her need to take over every moment, every bit of attention, was more than I could handle. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Have you ever dealt with a sibling who constantly took over or craved attention to the point of hurting others? I'd love to hear about your experiences. Let's talk about it in the comments below. And thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories filled with drama and real-life twists. I'll be back with more soon, and I can't wait to share more stories with you.